talking about the human mind, of course, we know it's this amazing thing. It's created, from Einstein onwards, just, I mean, the miracles that we've created, the technology we're talking on right now is incredible. So it isn't as black and white as, break your bone, put it in a cast, take some anti-inflammatories, some pain-killing drugs, 6 weeks later it's fixed. It's not that simple, because the human brain is really complicated, and it works on addictions, and, particularly around food. When you make food that is a mixture of sugar, salt, fat, and gluten, and meat, it's like cocaine. It's just cocaine for the human brain. And so when you get addicted to that kind of food, not only do you get addicted emotionally to it, but you get less nutrition from it, and your gut health drops in quality, and its ability to give you good genetic expression and strength drops. So,
also known as the second brain, right?
The second brain, exactly. Your whole gut, the microbiome known as the second brain, exactly. So you get into this vicious cycle, And so when you look at the brain and you look at how does this happen, there's three basic chemicals that work in the brain in terms of what we call happiness chemicals. Three basic, there's a lot of chemicals in the brain, and we're discovering them all the time. But there's three really big ones. One's called dopamine, and that's connected to external reward. Then there's one called serotonin, which is connected to internal happiness. And then there's oxytocin, which is connected to contribution. So what happens is, you do rewarding things that give you rewards, like you might get a bonus at work with money, or you have a coffee, or you have some alcohol, or you win a prize, you go on a holiday, those kind of things. Excuse me. Those kind of things are what we call dopamine or external rewards, and they stimulate your dopamine, which again shows you why it's so easy to get addicted to them, because they're external, and you can buy them, or you can use them, or you can shop for them, or you can have them, or you can get them in the external world. Serotonin.
Just on that, sorry.
Yeah.
The dopamine, would Instagram, checking your Instagram.
Absolutely. Yep. It can be anything from sexual addiction, like pornography addiction, coffee addiction, alcohol addiction. Food addiction, of course, online addiction, checking your phone, like you say, social media addiction. And that's a whole area that there's a whole 2 or 3 generations of young people right up to your age. You're in that age where you're between 20 and 30, and then you've got the 20 younger. Those 2 generations, they're undergoing the biggest social experiment in history, because you've got 2 million people or so. 2 billion people on Facebook, and Instagram. When you talk about the biggest experiment in history, these are people growing up in a virtual world that is actually not real. It's just people comparing things with each other and posting highlights, right? And highlight reel, yeah. And yet these people are growing up thinking that somehow is real, and that plugs in, just like you say, to the dopamine. So when you look at dopamine, it's external. Serotonin is internal. And then you've got oxytocin, which is contribution. So dopamine is about external things that we can get addicted to, that give us reward and joy, and dopamine is more about pleasure. So hence, a good example of it is around sexual addiction or pornography or whatever it is, without putting any judgment or opinion on it. Just, it gives us pleasure. We're wired for sex and for sexual activity. So, you can become addicted to pornography or to sexual activity, or be it good or bad or whatever. In a way that you can kind of understand, because it's that pleasure. We get pleasure from sex, and we also get pleasure from caffeine and coffee and alcohol and all those things. So you can get addicted to that externally, but what happens is when you get addicted to, or you get too much dopamine and not enough serotonin and oxytocin, and we'll talk about them in a second, you get more and more needing of the dopamine, because the more dopamine you get, the more it kills the neurons that appreciate dopamine. So it's this vicious cycle where you need more of it. So hence someone starts off with one coffee, they get this real hit, their blood pressure goes up, and oh my God, the coffee's great. Oh, they get all wired and hyperactive, But then after a time, one coffee isn't enough, and you need 2 coffees. And you notice you have one at 9 o'clock, and then one at 10:30 or 11. Then it's one at 9 o'clock and 10:30, and then at 1. Then again at 3. And so it's because the drug, it stops. Its power slows down, and there's not as much power in it, because the neurons that sense the joy and the pleasure die. And that's why when you talk to heroin addicts, they will tell you that the first heroin hit is always the best, and they spend a lifetime going back hit after hit to try to get the same high they had the first time. They never will. So you need more and more of it. That's the danger with dopamine, and dopamine stops you appreciating the other joy and happiness. And so let's get into serotonin. So then we look at serotonin. Enjoyable things that you love doing increase serotonin. So it could be walking in the bush, it could be playing music, singing, being with friends, community, that kind of thing. So the things that you enjoy, or cycling or boxing or whatever it is, for a lot of people it's physical activities or chess or reading a book, things like that. And so enjoyable things create serotonin. And the interesting thing about serotonin is that 90% is made in the gut. So again, tells you about how important the gut is, because serotonin is happiness. But also that serotonin is internal. And the thing about serotonin is you can never run out of it. Like if you have lots of serotonin, it doesn't mean you can't have lots more serotonin. But with dopamine you can run out because it's external. Serotonin is internal, you can never run out. It's like when you see kids, happiness also and energy levels, and with kids, for example, happiness with kids, you see kids running around and playing, right? They're running around and playing, and you don't find that suddenly at 12 o'clock they go, oh, it's 12 o'clock, I've run out of happiness for the day, so I'm now going to be sad. That doesn't happen for kids. They have a never-ending well of happiness. And it's like love. You have this never-ending well of love. I mean, the first time I saw my first child, Trey, I've never felt so much love, and I thought, how can you ever love anything more than I love Trey? And then Tove came along. And I was like, oh, Tove, I love her as much as Trey. How can I love, And then Luke came along. Oh, how can I love, And then Joel came along. And then Hadassah, my granddaughter, came along. And I love all these 5 children as much. There's this never-ending well of love in the human body and in the soul, or wherever it comes from. Happiness is the same. You don't run out of happiness. You just get your chemicals mixed up in the brain. And so children don't run out of happiness either. But if you start plying them with external stimuli, then they will get sad and frustrated until they get more of that stimuli, like some more of the iPhone or more of the laptop or more sugar or more whatever. And don't even get me started on kids having caffeinated drinks at a young age or coffee. It's so wrong, it's not funny. A whole seminar on that. So you've got the serotonin, which is internal. And the key thing to remember is serotonin is internal. You create it yourself. So happiness feeds happiness. Serotonin feeds serotonin. You can't get too much. It keeps feeding itself. You can never have too much. Whereas dopamine is external, about rewards. Then you get to oxytocin, which is the third chemical, and that's about contribution in the world. So you get that when you contribute. So when you go to your neighbour and you give them some fruit from your backyard, or you go to your church and donate your time, or you give a donation to someone, you'll give your clothes to a recycle boutique. That's all contributing to the world, which is focusing your energy on something more than yourself. When you do that, you get oxytocin. Now, oxytocin and serotonin build resilience. So you can imagine the brain scaffolding. You build resilience with those two. Then dopamine comes along, and if you're giving too much work to dopamine, you get stuck in the outside world and you look for your happiness externally. That's when we get into chasing money. I mean, financial stress is all about dopamine. And chasing the Jones, and I want a boat, and I want a bigger house, and I want more money, and I want more things. And so you get out into the external world rather than internal contentment. And so mindfulness, of course, being present, grows serotonin and grows oxytocin. And so if you can focus one of those crucial things, you can't have too much happiness, but you can have too much pleasure. And so getting that fine line between the two is important, because pleasure is wonderful, and we all want pleasure in our life. Pleasure is amazing, but you can get hooked on pleasure, but you can't get hooked on happiness. And so there's a real distinction there, and this is fundamental to me. It's a fundamental part of having people get well in their mind, is focusing on what makes me happy, what brings me real joy, what makes my community and my world happy and brings them joy. If I focus on those two, I'll build resilience in the brain, I'll build strength in the scaffolding, and then I can have little bits of dopamine, and I'm fine. So where we tend to go wrong is, like you just said, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is, the social media platforms. When you get plugged into that, and there's a whole generation growing up plugged into that, thinking that's where their identity lives, and that's who they are and who they be, and their joy and expression, which it's not. But when you focus on that, that's where I think that the scaffolding starts to fall over. And whether it's marijuana or cocaine or heroin or caffeine or coffee or food or whatever it is, that to me is a fundamental part of this whole conversation that we're not having. And that's why I think fasting is so good, whether you're fasting from food or whether you're fasting from technology. Just unplugging, say 7 o'clock every night you unplug, and then it's only reading a book or whatever, or you go for a walk in nature every day and you don't take the technology, whatever it is. But I think it's going to become more and more, the science will show that clearly, that that the more plugged in we are, the more unhappy we are. And we know that the richest countries are the most unhappy. The richer the average income in a country, the higher the depression. So we know happiness does not buy. Money does not buy happiness. We know that. It's internal, and that's why meditation and mindfulness comes. Where you get people with nothing are the happiest. But then they get hooked into that dopamine addiction of, but what about those other people? They've got those things, and then they start to fall down the cliff. So.